The morning sun cast long shadows across the remote military outpost as Captain Sarah Chun finished her routine patrol. The base sat on a rocky plateau surrounded by endless desert, its strategic location making it a crucial monitoring station for enemy movements. Sarah had been stationed here for 8 months, leading a team of 12 soldiers in what was supposed to be a quiet assignment. She walked toward the communications center, her boots crunching on the gravel. Something felt different today. The usual chatter from her team was absent, and an eerie silence hung in the air. As she approached the main building, she noticed the vehicles were gone. All of them. Her heart began to race as she pushed open the heavy metal door. The base was empty. Personal belongings were scattered everywhere as if people had left in a hurry. Sarah rushed to the communications room, finding only static on all channels. Her hands trembling, she tried every frequency, every emergency channel she knew. Nothing but white noise answered her calls. On the commander's desk, she found a hastily written note that made her blood run cold. Intelligence had received word of a massive enemy assault plan for this exact location. The evacuation order had come through at dawn, but somehow, Sarah had been overlooked during her extended patrol of the perimeter. Her team had been ordered to leave immediately, believing she had already been extracted by helicopter. Sarah stared at the note, her mind racing. The enemy force was estimated at nearly 100 soldiers, and they would arrive within hours. She was completely alone, with no way to call for backup, and no means of escape. The nearest friendly outpost was 3 days away on foot through hostile territory. She moved to the weapons cache, taking inventory of what remained. The evacuation had been so rushed that most of the ammunition and defensive equipment was still in place. She had enough supplies to last several days if she was careful. But against 92 enemy soldiers, it would be like trying to stop an ocean with her bare hands. Standing in the empty armory, Sarah made a decision that would define the next 8 hours of her life. She would not abandon her post. This base contained vital intelligence about troop movements and communication codes. If it fell into enemy hands, it could compromise operations across the entire region. She began preparing for the impossible. Moving quickly through the base, she set up defensive positions, rigged explosive traps, and created multiple fallback points. Every window, every door, every possible entry point needed to be covered. She dragged ammunition boxes to strategic locations and tested every weapon system. As she worked, memories of her training flooded back. Years of preparation for scenarios just like this one, though her instructors had never imagined she would face such overwhelming odds alone. Sarah thought of her family back home, of the letters she had written but never sent. Today might be the day those words would never reach them. The sun climbed higher, and, in the distance, she could see dust clouds on the horizon. They were coming. Sarah took one last look around the base that had been her home, said a quiet prayer, and took her position. She checked her rifle one final time and waited for the storm to arrive. The first shots rang out at exactly 10:47 a.m. Sarah watched through her scope as the enemy vehicles approached in formation, kicking up clouds of dust that partially concealed their numbers. She had positioned herself in the main watchtower, giving her the best view of the surrounding terrain and multiple escape routes if her position became compromised. She counted them as they emerged from the dust cloud. 92 soldiers, just as the intelligence report had predicted. They moved with military precision, spreading out to surround the base. Sarah realized they expected to find a full garrison defending the outpost. They had no idea they were about to face a single opponent. Her first target was the communications specialist setting up equipment near their lead vehicle. Sarah steadied her breathing, lined up her shot, and squeezed the trigger. The soldier dropped instantly, and chaos erupted in the enemy ranks. They scattered for cover, unsure where the shot had come from. Sarah used their confusion to her advantage. She fired 3 more carefully aimed shots, taking down soldiers who were trying to establish positions. Then, she quickly moved to her second prepared location in the eastern bunker. The enemy would be trying to triangulate her position based on muzzle flash, and staying in one place would mean certain death. From the bunker, she could see soldiers advancing on 3 sides. They were using standard assault tactics, moving in small groups while others provided covering fire. Sarah triggered the first of her booby traps, an explosive device she had rigged near the main gate. The blast sent 2 soldiers flying and created a temporary barrier of debris. The enemy commander was smart. Instead of rushing the base, he split his forces into smaller units that began probing for weaknesses. Sarah found herself constantly moving between positions, using the base's layout to her advantage. She had spent months learning every corridor, every hiding spot, every angle of fire. One group of soldiers managed to breach the southern wall. Sarah was ready for them. She had set up a crossfire position using mounted machine guns that she could operate by remote control. As the soldiers poured through the gap, she unleashed devastating fire that forced them back outside. But the enemy was learning too. They began targeting the base's infrastructure, trying to cut off her power and eliminate her advantages. Sarah watched as they systematically destroyed the external generators and communication arrays. She was truly on her own now, with no hope of calling for help. The assault intensified as the enemy grew more aggressive. Mortar rounds began falling inside the compound, forcing Sarah to abandon some of her prepared positions. She grabbed essential supplies and fell back to the central building, the most heavily fortified part of the base. As explosions shook the ground around her, Sarah counted her remaining ammunition. She had used nearly a quarter of her supplies in the first hour, and the enemy was still at full strength. At this rate, she would run out of bullets long before they ran out of soldiers. She needed a new strategy. Retreating to the base's underground sections, Sarah began implementing guerrilla tactics. She would hit them hard and fast, then disappear before they could respond. The base's ventilation system and maintenance tunnels became her hidden highways, allowing her to appear and vanish like a ghost. Her next strike came from an unexpected angle. Using the underground passages, she emerged behind enemy lines and eliminated 4 soldiers before melting back into the shadows. The enemy forces were becoming frustrated and disorganized. They had expected a quick victory, not this prolonged battle of attrition against an invisible opponent. As the second hour began, Sarah knew she had already achieved something remarkable. Against impossible odds, she was holding her ground. But the real test was yet to come. The enemy would regroup, adapt their tactics, and press their numerical advantage. The longest and most dangerous part of her battle was about to begin. By the third hour, the base looked like a war zone. Smoke billowed from damaged buildings, and the sound of gunfire echoed constantly across the compound. Sarah had lost count of how many enemy soldiers she had eliminated, but their numbers still seemed overwhelming. Every time she thought she was gaining ground, more appeared to take their place. The enemy commander had changed tactics. Instead of trying to storm the base, he was now conducting a siege. Small teams would advance, probe for weaknesses, and retreat when they met resistance. They were trying to wear her down, force her to exhaust her ammunition and energy. Sarah adapted accordingly. She began conserving her shots, only firing when she was certain of a hit. Every bullet had to count now. She also started using the base's own systems against the attackers. The fuel depot became a massive trap when she ignited it just as a squad was passing nearby. The explosion was so powerful it shattered windows throughout the compound. The psychological warfare was taking its toll on both sides. The enemy soldiers were becoming increasingly nervous, knowing that an unseen sniper could take them down at any moment. Some began to hang back, reluctant to advance into what had become a killing field. Their commander had to threaten and cajole his men to maintain the assault. For Sarah, the isolation was the hardest part. Hours of intense combat with no support, no friendly voices, no backup plan. She found herself talking aloud sometimes, just to hear a human voice in the endless noise of battle. Her hands were steady, but inside, she was fighting panic as much as she was fighting the enemy. The turning point came when the enemy tried to use smoke grenades to cover their advance. Sarah couldn't see her targets, but she had memorized the base layout so completely that she could predict their movements. She fired blind into the smoke and heard screams that told her she had found her marks. But the smoke worked both ways. Under its cover, several enemy soldiers managed to enter the main building. Sarah heard their footsteps below and knew her sanctuary had been breached. She quickly rigged the stairwell with explosive charges and retreated to the upper levels. The building became a vertical battleground. Enemy soldiers advanced up the stairs while Sarah defended from above. She used furniture as barricades, turning office desks and filing cabinets into defensive positions. When the explosives in the stairwell detonated, they eliminated 6 soldiers, but also cut off one of her escape routes. Trapped on the upper floor with limited ammunition, Sarah made a desperate decision. She used the building's fire escape system, sliding down cables to reach the ground level while enemy forces were still clearing the debris upstairs. It was a dangerous maneuver that could have ended her life, but it allowed her to escape the trap. Now the battle became even more mobile. Sarah moved constantly between buildings, using everything from the mess hall to the motor pool as temporary fighting positions. The enemy had spread out across the entire base, making it impossible for her to monitor all fronts simultaneously. She began using misdirection as a weapon. Sarah would fire a few shots from one location, then quickly move to another position and create noise to make the enemy think multiple defenders were present. The confusion bought her precious time and kept the assault teams from coordinating effectively. As the 4th hour began, both sides were showing signs of exhaustion. The enemy had taken heavy casualties, but they still outnumbered Sarah significantly. Their commander called for a temporary ceasefire to regroup and tend to the wounded. Sarah used this break to resupply from hidden caches she had prepared earlier. Standing in the ruins of what had been her home for 8 months, Sarah assessed her situation. She had lost ground but was still fighting. The enemy was frustrated and demoralized, but far from defeated. She had ammunition for maybe 2 more hours of sustained combat, and no guarantee that help would arrive even if she could hold out that long. The silence during the ceasefire was almost more unnerving than the constant gunfire. Sarah could hear the enemy soldiers calling to each other, reorganizing their positions. She knew they were preparing for a final assault, one that would either break her resistance or cost them so many men that they would be forced to retreat. She checked her weapon one more time and prepared for the next phase of the battle. The hardest part was yet to come. The renewed assault began with a vengeance. The enemy commander had clearly decided that enough was enough. This time, they attacked from all directions simultaneously, using everything they had left. Rockets screamed overhead, machine gun fire swept the compound, and assault teams rushed forward with determination born of desperation. Sarah found herself in the fight of her life. She moved through the base like a shadow, appearing just long enough to eliminate targets before vanishing again. Her ammunition was running dangerously low, forcing her to make every shot count. She began retrieving weapons from fallen enemies, using their own equipment against them. The enemy had brought in heavy weapons now. A rocket-propelled grenade punched through the wall of the communications center where Sarah had taken cover, missing her by inches. The blast threw her across the room, leaving her ears ringing and debris in her hair. But she kept fighting. In the 5th hour, something remarkable happened. The enemy's overwhelming numbers began working against them. In their eagerness to end the battle, soldiers were getting in each other's way. Sarah exploited this confusion, using their own crossfire to eliminate multiple targets. When one squad attempted to flank her position, they ran directly into another unit advancing from the opposite direction, resulting in friendly fire casualties. Sarah's guerrilla tactics were taking a psychological toll on the attacking force. Soldiers began looking over their shoulders, afraid that the ghost defender would appear behind them. Their advance became hesitant, their formations loose. The confident assault force that had arrived that morning was now a nervous, depleted unit fighting an enemy they couldn't pin down. But Sarah was reaching her limits too. Hours of intense combat had left her physically and mentally exhausted. Her hands shook from adrenaline and fatigue, making accurate shooting more difficult. She had minor injuries from flying debris and near misses, nothing serious individually, but cumulatively draining her strength. The base itself was nearly destroyed. Most buildings were damaged or completely ruined. Fires burned unchecked in several areas, filling the air with thick smoke that made breathing difficult. The once proud military installation looked like it had been hit by an earthquake and a hurricane simultaneously. During a brief lull in the fighting, Sarah made a disturbing discovery. While searching for ammunition in one of the damaged buildings, she found evidence that this attack was not random. The enemy had detailed maps of the base, information about its defenses, knowledge of its weak points. Someone had provided them with intelligence, possibly someone from her own unit. This revelation hit her harder than any explosion. The idea that she might have been deliberately left behind, that her abandonment might not have been an oversight, filled her with a cold fury. But it also gave her new determination. If someone had betrayed her, she would make sure their plan failed spectacularly. The 6th hour brought the enemy's most desperate assault yet. They threw everything they had remaining at her position, determined to end the battle before they suffered any more casualties. Sarah found herself completely surrounded in the base's command center, the last intact building. She had prepared for this moment. The command center was built like a fortress, with thick walls and multiple defensive positions. Sarah had stockpiled weapons and ammunition here during the brief ceasefire. If this was to be her final stand, she would make it count. The building became a maze of deadly encounters. Enemy soldiers entered through windows and doors, only to find themselves in carefully prepared kill zones. Sarah moved through the building's corridors like she owned them, which in a sense she did. Every corner, every room, every piece of cover had been turned into part of her defensive strategy. The fighting was brutal and close quarters. Sometimes Sarah found herself face-to-face with enemy soldiers in narrow hallways, with barely enough room to aim her weapon. Her training took over, muscle memory guiding her through combat techniques she had practiced thousands of times, but never used in actual battle. As the 7th hour began, Sarah realized something that shocked her. Despite being outnumbered nearly 100-1, she was winning. The enemy force had been reduced to perhaps 30 soldiers, and their morale was completely broken. What had been intended as a quick victory had become a costly nightmare. But the battle was far from over. The remaining enemy soldiers were now the most dangerous ones, the survivors who had proven they could adapt and endure. The final hour would determine whether Sarah's incredible stand would end in victory or valiant defeat. The 8th and final hour began with an eerie quiet. Both sides were exhausted, their ammunition running low, their nerves frayed beyond measure. The once mighty assault force had been reduced to fewer than 20 soldiers, while Sarah remained alone but unbroken in her defensive position. The enemy commander made one final attempt at negotiation. His voice echoed across the ruined base through a megaphone, offering Sarah safe passage if she would surrender the base and its intelligence. She responded with a single, precisely aimed shot that destroyed the megaphone and sent the commander diving for cover. Her message was clear. There would be no surrender. The final assault was different from all the others. The remaining enemy soldiers were desperate but experienced. They had learned from 8 hours of costly mistakes. They moved carefully, used proper cover, and coordinated their attacks. But Sarah had evolved too. She was no longer the same person who had begun this battle alone and afraid. She had become something more dangerous than they could have imagined. Using the last of her prepared explosives, Sarah brought down part of the command center's roof, creating new defensive positions while blocking several access routes. The falling debris eliminated 3 more attackers and forced the others to approach from predictable directions. The psychological advantage had completely shifted. The enemy soldiers who had arrived confident and overwhelming now moved like hunted animals. Every shadow could hide their nemesis. Every sound could signal their doom. Some began to retreat without orders, preferring the risk of facing their commander's wrath to certain death in this cursed place. Sarah's ammunition was nearly gone. She had perhaps 50 rounds left for her primary weapon and a handful of grenades. Against a fresh enemy force, it would have been hopeless. But these were not fresh soldiers. They were broken, demoralized, and terrified of a single defender who had proven herself to be seemingly invincible. The end came suddenly. As Sarah prepared for what she believed would be her final stand, she heard a sound that made her heart leap with hope. The distant roar of helicopter engines, growing louder by the second. Through the smoke and dust, she could see military aircraft approaching on the horizon. Her radio crackled to life for the first time in 8 hours. A familiar voice filled the air, calling her designation and asking for her status. It was Colonel Martinez, her commanding officer, leading a rescue operation that had been mounted as soon as command realized she had been left behind. The remaining enemy soldiers saw the helicopters too. Their assault collapsed instantly as they scattered in every direction, desperate to escape before the reinforcements arrived. The battle that had raged for 8 hours ended as quickly as it had begun. As the rescue helicopters touched down and friendly soldiers poured out, Sarah finally allowed herself to collapse against a wall. She was alive. Against all odds, against overwhelming numbers, against betrayal and abandonment, she had held her ground. The base was destroyed but still in friendly hands, its intelligence secure. Colonel Martinez found her sitting in the ruins of the command center, still clutching her rifle. His face showed a mixture of relief, amazement, and profound respect. The reports they had received during the flight seemed impossible to believe, but the evidence was all around them. Later investigation would reveal that Sarah had eliminated 68 enemy soldiers and wounded dozens more. The attacking force had suffered over 70% casualties against a single defender. Military historians would later call it one of the most remarkable defensive actions in modern warfare. The betrayal investigation discovered that a supply sergeant in her unit had been providing information to enemy agents in exchange for money. He had deliberately arranged for Sarah to be overlooked during the evacuation, expecting her to be killed before anyone realized the mistake. Instead, his actions had created a legend. Sarah was awarded the highest military honors her country could bestow. But, more than that, she had proven something to herself and to the world. When pushed to the absolute limit, when facing impossible odds with no hope of survival, human courage and determination could achieve the impossible. The abandoned base was eventually rebuilt and renamed Fort Sarah Chun. A memorial there tells the story of 8 hours that proved one person, properly motivated and prepared, could indeed hold back an army. Sarah herself returned to duty, but she would never again be underestimated by friend or foe. The desert wind still blows across that rocky plateau, but it carries a different message now. It whispers of courage, of determination, of one woman who refused to yield when the whole world seemed arrayed against her. Some battles are won not by superior numbers or better equipment, but by the simple refusal to give up when giving up would be the reasonable thing to do. Sarah had found her limit that day and discovered it was much further than she had ever imagined.